Yes. We will be reading from the textbook, chapter 4, section 2 today, the ego and false autonomy. And David, let's see, Noel, did you have a comment?
Yes, on the turtle cartoon, we feel threatened and naked outside the ego.
Yes, threatened and naked without our shell. The
ego shell.
Right, right. Very good. Thank you. Okay, so with that, we'll get into the reading. And thank you, David, for working from your phone today.
It is reasonable to ask how the mind could ever have made the ego. In fact, it is the best question you could ask. There is, however, no point in giving an answer in terms of the past, because the past does not matter, and history would not exist if the same errors were not being repeated in the present. Abstract thought applies to knowledge because knowledge is completely impersonal, and examples are irrelevant to its understanding. Perception, however, is always specific and therefore quite concrete.
Mm-hmm. So someone asked this question in class a week or two ago: how is it that the ego came about? It says here it's one of the best questions that you could ask, but people frequently think of that question in terms of long, long ago at the beginning of time, or the beginning of humanity. How was the ego made? And the Course says the more useful way to think about it is in the present, because that's where the errors that we're concerned about are occurring, is in the present. We want to stop the errors that our mind is making. So we'll pursue this some more in just a moment. Let's see, sorry, more people joining here. So there's a statement, this is a little difficult, perhaps. It has to do with abstract thought, which in heaven is full of abstract thought. For in other words, when people say things and feel things, they feel it for everything and everyone. So it's all encompassing. So abstract thought is therefore completely impersonal. It's not selecting a few out. So on earth, we might say, for instance, I'm in love, and that usually means with one other person. In heaven, if you said I'm in love, it means it's impersonal. It's for everybody. And therefore, selecting specific examples in heaven is irrelevant. It is not the way knowledge works, because knowledge is all-encompassing. And an example of this will come up with the lessons of the Holy Spirit: to have, give all to all. So what's that mean? Well, it's completely abstract. It's impersonal. Who's it about? It's about everything. It's about all. And attempting to understand it. Well, so what we do is we tend to want to take that information down to our level of understanding, which is perception, which is an entirely different way of approaching life. Perception is very specific and very concrete, and it looks for specific examples. So in trying to understand to have, give all to all, we wind up using perception and try to think of specific ways in which that would apply. So the key takeaway here is they are two different orders of thought system. And we have a great deal of experience with the perceptual thought system, but we've forgotten, the course would say, our experience with knowledge, with abstract thought. And so this course will help you to learn your way back to thought, which encompasses everything and everyone forever. To have, give all to all, encompasses everything and everyone forever. Let's go on.
Everyone makes an ego or a self for himself, which is subject to enormous variation because of its instability. He also makes an ego for everyone else he perceives, which is equally variable. Their interaction is a process that alters both because they were not made by or with the unalterable. It is important to realize that this alteration can and does occur as readily when the interaction takes place in the mind as when it involves physical interaction. Thinking about another ego is as effective in changing relative perception as is physical interaction. There could be no better example that the ego is only an idea and not a fact.
Mm-hmm. So this is one, if you can catch this first stanza here and its meaning, it's one of the easiest ways to understand what this ego image making is all about. Everyone makes an image of themselves that they want to believe is true about themselves. Everyone does that. And there's a lot of variation throughout the world of those images because by their inherent nature, they are unstable. The minute, none of your self-images will last very long. They will be discarded in favor of another self-image and another self-image. The fact that we do this for ourselves then has repercussions. We also do this in the way we think about everybody else. And therefore, we make an image of other people. By an image, what I really mean is a way of representing in your mind what that person is. For instance, your father, or your mother, or your sister, your brother. You have an image in your mind of what those people are, but those images are ego-defined images. They're not of their pure spirit. And so this is the process. And here's the consequence of all that is when you get two people together, they interact in a process that alters each other's images. Remember, these images are very unstable. And so if someone says something about you or to you, it causes uncertainty it may cause uncertainty in the way you think about yourself. It's unstable and it alters you. And so that's what image making is all about. In contrast, the spirit, which is what you truly are, is unalterable. It has never changed and never will change. So it's essential we begin to truly appreciate what it is our ego has been doing because only then, when you see it for what it is, will you be willing to withdraw your interest in it. Heidi?
Does your ego ever create or see other than fear? Is your ego capable of love?
No. No. So from A Course in Miracles point of view, no. But it might do many things, Heidi, that people call love. Like two people can meet each other and have a one-night stand and say they're in love.
Right.
Okay, so we're not talking about that. We're talking
Right. I
about
got that.
something genuine here. And no, the ego cannot, because the ego is based on hatred, is at the center of its thought system, and it's not capable of moving all the way to love.
So if somebody is not aware of the Course and doesn't know that there's ego, doesn't know that there's fear or love, if they say something to me that's positive, that means that it's coming from love, even though they don't know there's a difference. Like everybody has ego and love. Do you know what I'm saying? Trying to ask.
Yeah, so the way to think about it, Heidi, is their intention. If their intention is they're coming from their heart, they're doing the very best they can, then that's likely that's coming from their higher self.
And that can happen even if they don't know that exists.
I don't know. I need to pass on that one. I'm not sure how to answer that one. Sorry.
Okay.
Maybe it'll come to me later. Maybe somebody else has a better idea.
Okay.
I think what you just asked is, even though a person does not know that love exists, can they?
No, they don't know they have a higher self. If they're saying something coming from love,
Heidi, I don't have an opinion on that. I have no, if I did, I would share it, but I don't have an opinion.
okay.
Heather?
Yeah, I have an opinion. Yes, I think we all have a higher self, and even before we ever got the Course, we were totally asleep to that. And our higher self would respond from, to things that were very appropriate with love. So yes, we have, that's not coming from the ego, that's coming from our self that is not always conscious. So I think that other part of us, it's there. You can see it. You can see children have it. So yes, it's definitely something that's there, and it's genuine. It's just not developed.
There you go. Not developed. Thank you. Richard?
Yeah, for me, it said it that the ego is just a figment of my imagination.
Yes.
I feed my ego. I feed the illusion that that's not the real me. The real me is my soul.
Yes.
Where peace rests. For me, I read this early this morning, this particular chapter. I had no idea that we were reading it today. In the operant word that I see, the ego is just an idea. And it takes its ideas, my ideas, out on the road. If I could, in Gurdjieff work, they used to talk about self-remembering. If I can remember myself without having to tell myself to remember myself, then I can go back to where it all began.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Good.
today I found myself talking to someone about music. I love music and the harmonic waves and just certain sounds that seem to resonate in me. And I like this person as a friend, and I saw myself wanting this person to like this piece of music, not because, but my ego wanted him as a friend. So I was to use I don't know what it's called, I forget. I was barking up the wrong tree. I lost myself. because the ego said, I want this person to be my friend. It's not, when I get back to myself, then it becomes clear. I don't need that constant reassurance.
There you go.
That,
There you go.
so,
Thank you, brother.
yeah, thank you, man.
Self-remembering. That's really good. Noel? You're muted, Noel. I'm sorry.
I find that I have different self-images with different people.
Very
And
good.
that's hard to negotiate sometimes because my higher self wants to be more consistent and more loving all the time.
Hmm.
And yet I still find myself fighting against myself, my image of that person
Mm-hmm.
when I'm interacting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, that's really good that you're conscious of it, Noel. That's the first step towards freedom, is that you recognize it. Because just like we read in Let Me Recognize the Problem So It Can Be Solved, if you don't recognize the issue, you can't even begin to accept the answer. So you're on the first stage. Your higher self, remember, is unalterable, and therefore is it always in a state of consistency. All those swapping images out is exactly what the ego would have us be preoccupied with. That's the illusion. That's the separation from our true self, is believing we are a different self. And a self, as you said, of our own creating, or of our own making.
And that interferes with true communication with someone else, whether it's verbally or mentally.
It most certainly does. Thank you. David?
I love the reference in this particular paragraph about their interaction as a process that alters both, and that the alteration occurs as readily when the interaction takes place in the mind as when it involves physical interaction. And this takes me to the lesson, there are no private thoughts, and that our thoughts about another ego and an interaction with another ego that we project have an effect, and not an effect in the sense, in the grand sense, but in the I don't know, in the energy sense.
In the unstable world, it has an effect.
Right.
Yeah, remember what's being altered is the images we have of each other and how they're coming together. So yes, I'm not alone in experiencing the effects of my thinking. So in that unstable environment, we're all pinging off of each other with different thoughts. And so this is not freedom. This is part of what we call the illness. Let's read further on.
Your own state of mind is a good example of how the ego was made. When you threw knowledge away, it is as if you never had it. This is so apparent that one need only recognize it to see that it does happen. If this occurs in the present, why is it surprising that it occurred in the past? Surprise is a reasonable response to the unfamiliar, though hardly to something that occurs with such persistence. But do not forget that the mind need not work that way, even though it does work that way now.
Mm-hmm. So the emphasis here being is that the past is repeating itself. Our union, our understanding of our relationship to creation was, yes, separated, split off in the past, But what is apparent is that that's still happening now. We're not trying to change the past in healing. We're trying to catch up with the present and become free of the past. And so that's where the focus of the question is. Why am I still adhering to the ego today? And see, I think you'll find is, and the ego does not want you to phrase it that way. It would prefer you become very theoretical and abstract about a distant past. But the real issue is in your present day. Why is it that your mind is still giving faith to these images of yourself and of others and believing that those illusions are real? And when we can crack that conundrum of why am I still doing it now, then we will understand how the ego's thought system works and be prepared to dismiss it. It's really unworthy of your attention. And so we're exposing it like the turtle outside of the shell. We're exposing it for what it is. We'll go on.
Think of the love of animals for their offspring and the need they feel to protect them. That is because they regard them as part of themselves. No one dismisses something he considers part of himself. You react to your ego much as God does to his creations, with love, protection, and charity. Your reactions to the self you made are not surprising. In fact, they resemble in many ways how you will one day react to your real creations, which are as timeless as you are. The question is not how you respond to the ego, but what you believe you are.
Mm-hmm.
Belief is an ego function. And as long as your origin is open to belief, you are regarding it from an ego viewpoint. When teaching is no longer necessary, you will merely know God. Belief that there is another way of perceiving is the loftiest idea of which ego thinking is capable. That is because it contains a hint of recognition that the ego is not the self.
Mm-hmm. Wow, there's so many things that can be said just about this. First, real quick, as a reminder, the three states of consciousness, false perception, true perception, and knowledge, are referred to right here. Belief in the ego, so we're talking about false perception. As long as your origin is open into question, you'll be believing from an ego viewpoint. So that's false perception. Belief that there's another way of perceiving is reference pointing to true perception. That is the loftiest idea of which ego is capable at this time, right now. So shifting to the belief that you can change your mind. I'm determined to see things differently. It contains a hint of recognition that the ego image is not your true self, that there's something lofty beyond the images that the ego is making. And finally, the third state would be the state of knowledge. When teaching is no longer necessary, when all the lessons have been learned and forgiveness is complete, you will merely know God. You won't have a belief system about God or about yourself. You will have perfect knowledge, which goes beyond intellect, beyond teaching, beyond mind. It's certainty with a capital C, divine certainty. Okay. I want to point to one other issue, which is deep, but I want to point it out to you so that we plant a seed. It's the idea of reacting to something that you consider different from yourself versus reacting to something that you consider to be part of yourself. So many loving parents feel like their children are part of themselves. Their love for them, they're occupied with that feeling of that. And we're think of the love of animals, where they feel like their young are part of themselves. And so this is a hint, a glimpse of what it would be like in heaven, where you feel everyone is a part of yourself. And then just one more aspect of it, in separation in our world, it would be very easy to think of people that you've never met, you've never seen, as strangers that have nothing to do with you. That would be, as a matter of fact, wars are fought because people feel like the people on the other side of the border or the other side of the river are different than them. With the Course, and the Holy Spirit does not recognize those artificial boundaries, those images that people have made of one another. She recognizes that we all share a common origin and are therefore all a part of the universal true self. And so where this Course goes is eventually we adopt the Holy Spirit's perception as our own. And we start to feel like everyone is a part of ourself. And I don't mean your body, I mean your true divine self, your cosmic self. And from that point of view, you can begin to understand, to have, give all to all, because everyone is a part of your true self. And if you want to have your true self, you give all you have to everyone. There's no separation, no artificial constructs of differences. So that's a deeper message, and maybe not one that everyone will embrace today, but that's how the Holy Spirit thinks, perceives our relationships. That's what her teaching system is based on. That's the vision of where we're going. Let's go on. David?
Undermining the ego's thought system must be perceived as painful, even though this is anything but true. Babies scream in rage if you take away a knife or scissors, although they may well harm themselves if you do not. In this sense, you are still a baby. You have no sense of real self-preservation and are likely to decide that you need precisely what would hurt you most. Yet, whether or not you recognize it now, you have agreed to cooperate in the effort to become both harmless and helpful, attributes that go together. Your attitudes, even toward this, are necessarily conflicted, because all attitudes are ego-based. This will not last. Be patient a while, and remember that the outcome is as certain as God.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to comment on the parts that are most interesting to me. And I had this whole thing around understanding attitudes, and was therefore surprised when I guess one of the lovely things, an attitude of gratitude, was part of my vocabulary, that I aspired to make that my attitude of gratitude. And I thought that was a good thing. What the Course teaches is that all attitudes are ego-based and therefore they're not going to last. And so I had to look into this a little bit more. So what we mean by attitude is a fixed state of mind regarding a situation, a group of people, a condition, life, where my mind is made up. My attitude is firm. And therefore my mind is closed to changing to something else. So attitudes anchor us in what we have already decided in the past to be useful or true, and interferes with our ability to accept Holy Spirit truth that comes in the present. And so if you want to talk about how does the ego get started? Right there. I've already made up my mind of what's true about these situations, and I don't need to learn anything different. I'm rigid in that, and therefore closed to the inspiration and guidance of the Holy Spirit. And so it's a mental orientation. They refer to this in biblical times as attempting to put fresh wine, new wine, into old wine sacks. The idea is an old wine sack is dried out and cracked and brittle and will leak. And attempting to put new wine, which is meant to be new truth, into an old, cracked, and brittle container is not going to be useful because it's all going to leak out. You put new wine into new wine sacks, into a mind that is willing to change and recognizes, in fact, we learn in the Course of Miracles, that the power to change your mind is a God-given right. But you have to be willing. You have to have the willingness to change your mind and not default to an attitude that, and just one quick, I don't know if this is useful, but I'll just say it real quickly. Many people wind up being raised in their families, religious or political system, whatever that may be, they wind up adopting that for themselves for perhaps their entire life, because they have an attitude that was given to them that this is the better way, and they remain within that system. A person who decides to move beyond that system is an indication, at least, that they're thinking for themselves. I don't know if that was helpful, but just trying to cite examples here. Noelle?
I think of the words breaking up like an ice on a lake. Break up the old thoughts and become more fluid.
Yes, it is a fluidity of thought. It's being open to truth. And many times, Noelle, in miracles, truth that arrives just in time, just in that moment when it's needed. So let me break that down. A miracle happens in a moment, an encounter, where we're in our right mind, we're ready to receive guidance. And in that moment, we are guided as to what to say or do with the other person. It's not that we're based on things we've learned years ago. It's that we're open to, this is Christ-guided miracles. They're read it in the principles. They depend on the time. It's a time factor in there. That's very important. All right, I want to move on because this next paragraph is one that I want to spend more time on.
Only those who have a real and lasting sense of abundance can be truly charitable. This is obvious when you consider what is involved. To the ego, to give anything implies that you will have to do without it. When you associate giving with sacrifice, you give only because you believe that you are somehow getting something better and can therefore do without the thing you give. Giving to get is an inescapable law of the ego, which always evaluates itself in relation to other egos. It is therefore continually preoccupied with the belief in scarcity that gave rise to it. Its whole perception of other egos as real is only an attempt to convince itself that it is real. Self-esteem in ego terms means nothing more than that the ego has deluded itself into accepting its reality and is therefore temporarily less predatory. This self-esteem is always vulnerable to stress, a term which refers to any perceived threat to the ego's existence.
I think that there's just so much here. So we will talk about the getting concept again and again because it's central to the ego. One way to think about it is the ego thinks it began with nothing. It's a belief that nothingness is the source of your origin. And therefore, in beginning with nothing, things are scarce. And all life is viewed as through the lens of scarcity. And therefore, it's occupied with getting more to fill itself. And this can become very addictive, as we know. The idea of getting just to get. I think the example they had, all right, I'm going off on a tangent, but Amelia Marcos, she had 3,000 pair of shoes and 200 of them were still in there, had never been opened. You know, it was just getting to get. She became, you know, she had, anyway, so ego will drive us in there. It's the inescapable law of the ego. And pay attention to this detail here. The ego always evaluates itself in relationship to other egos. It's a comparison. It's a judgment. How do I fit compared to the images I have of another person? And so it's inherently judgmental in doing that. And this can become very competitive as well by always being in comparison for. And so it's continually and why is that? Because it believes it started from nothingness and is comparing how well it's doing next to its image of other egos. And if you really pay attention, you might catch your own thoughts in this regard. Anytime you make a comparison between yourself and anybody else, you are in that thought loop. The ego always evaluates itself in relation to other egos. And by the way, it's your own judgments of the other person. None of this is real. None of this is objective. It's just your opinion at the moment. Okay, Heather?
Yeah, I'll tell myself I had the perfect, it just happened to me today. It was such a perfect example. I went swimming this morning and it was right after the aerobics class. And so I'm looking at all these old ladies, and they're doing their aerobics and I can't wait to get in to do my laps. So, they get out and I get in, I do my laps and I'm thinking, wow, I'm doing really good for 60 and compared to those old ladies in their class. So I'm getting toward the end of mine and all of a sudden these two beautiful girls come in, they're probably in their 40s and they're just gorgeous and they're all muscled up and they get in, they swim the laps and they're out swimming me by 10 times. And I'm just dying. I'm like, oh my God, there it goes. There it is in comparison. I was just laughing at myself so hard. It was like, I was so much better until they came along. And then I was like crushed. So I was just dying. And I didn't even know this was the lesson, but as soon as I read that, I thought that is so funny. That is exactly what I did this morning.
Yes. Okay, so one more point. Thank you, Heather, for telling on yourself there. But we all are smiling and laughing because we know. We've experienced it firsthand. So this is very revealing because since like the 1980s, actually it began before that, it was kind of the idea of I'm okay, you're okay. It was a psychological effort to build people's self-esteem, to make people feel good about themselves. And it's well intended, but there's a trap there that the ego will engage in, and it's self-esteem in ego terms, which really means that the self-esteem in ego terms is, this is the way I see myself, and I want to try to feel good about the way I see myself. So therefore, translated into what we're reading is, I've made an image of myself, and I want to be proud of that image I have of myself. It means nothing more than that the ego has deluded you itself into accepting the image is real. We used to say you believe in your own shtick. It's your own message about yourself, and you wind up believing in it and it become a loop. It can become a loop. And yet it's not stable, it's vulnerable, because of the reasons that we read earlier. Other people can come along and make comments that would cause all of that to be in question and become destabilized. So we, in this program, we're exposing the nakedness of the ego here. All this scheming to make images of yourself and others and comparing them, continually being preoccupied with the belief that we're lacking. All this is in contrast to the message of abundance from the Creator. Richard?
Yeah, hey, I'm right with you guys. It's just beautiful. What I'm hearing is intuitive. There's one fellowship organization that says we'll intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle us. So by getting back to myself, I don't need permission to pay a bill. I don't have to say, I'm going to pay a bill, just pay it without any explanation. It's like my ego gets hijacked by the image that I try to project out there. And then I end up losing myself. But the intuitive thought, for me, I don't know if it's a thought, because thought comes from the mind, but I will intuitively know how to handle situations. Now, that doesn't mean I do it all the time. That doesn't mean that I've got to change a tire when I don't know how to change a tire, or this. I'll know what to do. That something will show up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm, in other words, I'm not there alone, stranded on an island, looking for a ship to come by to rescue me.
Right.
It just is. But I don't think the ego can be, think. I don't think the ego can be explained with the ego, with my own ego.
Very good. I like that. Ego cannot be explained with the ego. Thank you,
Yes.
brother. Thank you
Just
for sharing.
experience. Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, we'll go on.
The ego literally lives by comparisons. Equality is beyond its grasp, and charity becomes impossible. The ego never gives out of abundance because it was made as a substitute for it. That is why the concept of getting arose in the ego's thought system. Appetites are getting mechanisms, representing the ego's need to confirm itself. This is as true of body appetites as it is of the so-called higher ego needs. Body appetites are not physical in origin. The ego regards the body as its home and tries to satisfy itself through the body. But the idea that this is possible is a decision of the mind, which has become completely confused about what is really possible.
Mhm. So there's a statement here that might grab your attention where it says body appetites are not a physical in origin. And so I just wanted to share a story that another miracle person shared with me some years back about running out to the store and buying a half a gallon of ice cream and eating the whole thing in one setting. All right. This was her confession. At some point, it's not hunger that one is eating for. And if you've ever overeaten, if you've ever gone to a buffet and eaten 3 times as much food as you needed, you know that it's not physical in origin. It's a mental state that somehow tells us we'll be better off, I'm using course language, if we continue getting more and more and more. This is a part of the getting mechanism of the ego. It's never satisfied, no matter how much it gets. And so gluttony, and all things that are taken in excess, particularly in extreme excess, are exactly this. It's the mind has come up with this belief that is ego-based, and it drives behavior rather than making choices based upon nutritional needs and bodily needs. And as you all know, this can become very self-destructive. Noelle?
It's also level confusion, which you emphasized quite a few weeks ago, trying to solve a mental, emotional, spiritual need with, chocolate fudge brownie nut ice cream or any other overeating thing.
Right, or any other, yeah. No, it's a good catch. It's definitely
Or any other overdoing anything, in fact.
Mm-hmm. It's an excellent example of level confusion, and this goes on all the time. Perhaps this is easier to see in this context, but that level confusion is occurring unconsciously to people with great frequency, which is why people go into excess, because they think more, their mind believes more will be better. Let's go on.
The ego believes it is completely on its own, which is merely another way of describing how it thinks it originated. This is such a fearful state that it can only turn to other egos and try to unite with them in a feeble attempt at identification, or attack them in an equally feeble show of strength. It is not free, however, to open the premise to question, because the premise is its foundation. The ego is the mind's belief that it is completely on its own. The ego's ceaseless attempts to gain the spirit's acknowledgement and thus establish its own existence are useless. Spirit, in its knowledge, is unaware of the ego. It does not attack it. It merely cannot conceive of it at all. While the ego is equally unaware of spirit, it does perceive itself as being rejected by something greater than itself. This is why self-esteem in ego terms must be delusional.
Mhm. So I don't know that I can find a better single statement about the ego than the one that appears here in the center of the paragraph. The ego is an idea. It's a belief that I'm completely on my own. Having started from nothing, I'm completely separate and isolated. And from that belief, the ego will go out and it says it's a fearful state. It can turn to other egos and try to unite with them and in an attempt at identification. This would be two egos united together. It's often said regarding marital partners, two halves make a whole. They refer to my better half, my other half. It's the idea that I was only half a person and now I'm whole. It's kind of baked into the language that we use. So let's go back to the central issue that the ego wants to hide and protect, which is this premise. It does not want you to examine this. And if you're taking notes, please highlight or write down. The ego is the mind's belief that's completely on its own. It is deeply afraid that you will question that premise, because therein is its beginning, is that I started from nothing and I'm on my own. And I'm in a void, a feeling of scarcity and emptiness. And I have to go out and get more things. And from there, the entire thought system builds out from this premise. So really a helpful way of grasping the way the ego thinks of itself. And it's an illusion. It's not true of you. Let me say it another way. Your spirit was created along with all of creation, not alone, but in fact, created as a part of a union where everyone was a part of you. Just the opposite of the way the ego believes. So it's an illusion that your creation by the creator is not true, but that the ego's teaching system is true. And little did we realize, but we wound up believing these things without even knowing it. Heather?
Yeah, I just had some empathy for something I never realized before. This fearful state can only turn to other egos and try to unite with them in a feeble attempt at identification, or attack them in an equally feeble show of strength. This is where the whole idea of gangs come from. And that they feel like they're so on their own. They have to try to find other people they can identify with, that they can team up with, that can help them feel like they're strong. And it just gave me some empathy to think, oh, it's this, it comes from this belief that they're on their own, that they're so alone that they have to find other people that can support them in their endeavor and their beliefs. So it just gave me a moment of empathy.
It's a really good example, Heather. It starts from a fearful state, and this is the solution that they are able to come up with that they think is available to them. So the next two, how are we doing on time here? The next two paragraphs, I was tempted to skip because I didn't have a lot to say about them. I tell you what, we'll skip paragraph 8 and just move on to number 9. David?
Myths and magic are closely associated, since myths are usually related to ego origins and magic to the powers the ego ascribes to itself. Mythological systems generally include some account of the creation and associate this with its particular form of magic. The so-called battle for survival is only the ego's struggle to preserve itself and its interpretation of its own beginning. This beginning is usually associated with physical birth, because it is hard to maintain that the ego existed before that point in time. The more religiously ego-oriented may believe that the soul existed before and will continue to exist after a temporary lapse into ego life. Some even believe that the soul will be punished for this lapse. However, salvation does not apply to spirit, which is not in danger and does not need to be salvaged.
So notice that the writer doesn't really take a position. He's just stating what other people believe about existence. But I do find it is probably the best working idea is the beginning of the ego is associated with physical birth. Because it's hard to maintain that the ego was somehow existing before there was a body. Although people do have other theories about your existence before birth, but it really comes down to the idea of who is the you that we're talking about. Certainly your body did not exist before birth. And then there's a question of your mind before birth. And then there's a question of your spirit before birth. And all that involves level confusion. And people get confused about it and try to tell a tale about beginnings. But I notice here it doesn't seem to be a statement about them. It's just a review of the many myths about ego origin. But notice the big thing here is that the ego struggles to preserve itself and struggles to preserve its interpretation of its own beginning in your mind. And that is that I'm all alone. It struggles with that. If you believed that I am as a part of God, I am as God created me, I'm part of him forever, then that notion utterly sweeps away anything that the ego says about its own origins. And so you might wonder, it would be a fair question to wonder, why is this question about origin so important? Why are we concerned about that topic, about the origin of the ego's belief about the origin itself? He says, because that's where the thought system began, and you cannot completely heal until you go to the beginning of the thought system. Think of it as the very center thread from which, if you pull that, everything unravels. You have to go to that. Otherwise, if you don't do that, you deal with symptoms and effects of the thought system, but don't get to the core of how it all started and what it's all based on. And what this course is deep and intended to free you entirely of the ego's thought system, and not merely to patch over certain wounds that you may have acquired along the way, but to completely free you. The Holy Spirit would not give you a gift with anything less than complete freedom. Heather?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, with this idea of physical birth, could that be one of the separations that we felt?
What for sure.
The first separation was from, that a symbiotic state to the cold reality of the world.
Yes, yes. So we'll have to deal with it another time, but I have 7 interpretations of the separation. This is certainly one of them right there, but there are others. And here, I can't read in here where he's endorsing that. This is usually associated with, it's hard to maintain. Anyway, this is all open to interpretation. David, you have a comment?
Yeah, what just has jumped out at me about what we're reading is yesterday's lesson, which for me, I'm doing it chronologically day by day, is let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. That all problems derive from the concept of separation. And in all of this that we're yabbing about and this, that, it's all from the separation. And nothing exists if the separation doesn't exist. None of this exists. And we're talking about attitude, and we're talking about judgment, and we're talking about interactions, and we're talking about the past and history. None of that is real. That's all. Just jumping out at me.
Yeah.
I can't.
Yeah.
But
No, it's so true. All that you said, I think is perfectly consistent here. And yet we spend our entire lives preoccupied with that list of things you just went through. So let me recognize the problem so it can be solved, because there's actually, part of that lesson was that the answer's already been given and the problem's already been solved. But if I don't recognize it, I don't participate in it. The separation's already been solved. But if you don't recognize the problem, you wind up being deluded by the errors of your own mind. Okay, I really love these last 2 paragraphs here.
salvation is nothing more than right-mindedness, which is not the one-mindedness of the Holy Spirit, but which must be achieved before one-mindedness is restored. Right-mindedness leads to the next step automatically, because right perception is uniformly without attack, and therefore wrong-mindedness is obliterated. The ego cannot survive without judgment and is laid aside accordingly. The mind then has only one direction in which it can move. Its direction is always automatic because it cannot but be dictated by the thought system to which it adheres.
Mm-hmm. So again, all 3 states of consciousness are referred to here. particularly as one is leaving the ego state, cannot survive without judgment. And with therefore, if the mind withdraws from judgment, the ego can't survive, and that entire image making, and this includes the image of myself and image of others, is laid aside. And so this is the void that Heather and Noel spoke about. Well, what then? What comes to take its place? And well, here's the clear answer. The mind, after the ego is laid aside, you can trust the mind then only has one direction in which it can move. Its direction is automatic because it's dictated by the thought system to which it adheres. In order to get to this state where the ego is set aside, first one needs to practice right-mindedness. So salvation is nothing more than right-mindedness. It allows you to look back on the ego and dismiss it with disinterest. I no longer want to invest that way. And then one can reach the last judgment, in which judgment is laid aside, and there's only one direction to move from there. So Noel, Heather, you're not in a void. The ego would have you believe you will be lost in a void of not knowing what to do. A Course in Miracles says that having reached this point where you're ready to make the last judgment, there's only one direction to go, because your mind will continue to be directed by the thought system to which it adheres, which is right-mindedness. And so that one direction will take you into the final phases that we call the light of grace, and then the transition beyond this world. It's, yeah. So we could come back to this and elaborate more sometime, because this is a template for the entire program here. Do notice, though, is the Holy Spirit a part of true perception or of knowledge?
True perception.
It would seem that way, but here it refers to the one-mindedness of the Holy Spirit. So in other places, David, it's not on this page. The Holy Spirit stands at the end of time, at the end of learning, and I'm going to use a metaphor of eyes here. It's a metaphor. She has one eye on knowledge, firmly rooted in eternal knowledge, and the other eye on the need to translate that into the understanding of time and space for our help. And so she's constantly, so she operates in both domains. But what we experience is more of her functioning in right perception, because that's the message that we need from her, is the one that has been translated out of abstract language and into language that is specific to our understanding at this time. So it's very interesting. That might be a detail that the further you get along in the course, you'll be able to appreciate that, which just means that the Holy Spirit is perfectly positioned to help us translate into knowledge, because she's always been there. And she's always been working in those two domains on our behalf. Felicia? Let me see if I can get you unmuted here. Oh, what's going on? There we go.
Me.
Yes. Hi.
I almost asked this question when we were in paragraph 8, but I didn't. I held off. And then when you said the Holy Spirit in perception or knowledge, back in paragraph 8, it says, Spirit in its knowledge is unaware of the ego.
Yes.
Is
Unaware of the ego.
unaware of the ego. That's when she's in knowledge. Well, if she's in perception, is she aware of the ego then? Like now, like I guess
So-
what?
Yeah, I understand your question. She would view it as a meaningless myth. So when you say, is she aware of the ego? She would see it as a bunch of nonsense that exists, that seems real to our minds, but has no reality to her. So she sees it just as an error waiting to be corrected.
My next question would be was when I'm praying to the Holy Spirit for guidance, would it be okay like to word it as, I mean, I know you can word it any way you want, but to help you with this special thing that's going on where you're struggling with your ego thoughts?
Yeah, it's perfectly okay, Felicia, and you know
Because I
that.
guess, yeah, I think I've been thinking that the Spirit wasn't aware of the ego, so it was like it's my responsibility to
Well,
out of the ego thoughts.
right. It does say, Felicia, very specifically that God realizes there's a communication breakdown between ourselves and spirit, that we haven't been listening and responding back to the messages from heaven. So it's in a sense that that they're not going to validate the ego. Spirit is not going to put a stamp of reality on it. But there's a realization that we're busy, preoccupied with nonsense. And so, but to your question about, is it okay? The wording doesn't matter, Felicia. It's your heart, and you know, it's your heart's intent that matters. As a matter of fact, you don't need to use words at all with the Spirit.
I know that.
Yeah. What are you going to tell her that she doesn't already know?
No, what I was trying to clarify was, does she know the ego is bothering me?
She knows when you're not responding to the Holy Spirit. She knows when communication stops. All right, so I'll speak first person here. She knows when for hours and hours I don't check in, and then I come back, that I must have been lost in my own ramblings there.
It came back in a different frame of mind than I was when I left.
Yeah.
So to speak.
Right.
Jonathan.
Thank you. Heather?
Yeah, I like to think of that question like, the boogeyman under the bed. The mom doesn't believe that there's anything under there. I mean, we do, when they're children, we think, oh my God, that's real. But she says, it's not real. I know that. But she doesn't shame you for that. She just comforts you in that and says, it's not real. I don't see it. I don't see there's anything there. But I know you do. And so, I'm going to help you through this because it's just, it's an illusion. See, she doesn't shame us for those kind of things that we fall short. She's there for us. But yeah, she knows that we scare ourselves with myths that aren't real.
Okay, I think this is our final paragraph here. David?
It cannot be emphasized too often that correcting perception is merely a temporary expedient.
Yeah.
It is necessary only because misperception is a block to knowledge, while accurate perception is a stepping stone towards it. The whole value of right perception lies in the inevitable realization that all perception is unnecessary. This removes the block entirely. You may ask, how this is possible as long as you appear to be living in this world? That's a reasonable question. You must be careful, however, that you really understand it. Who is the you who are living in this world? Spirit is immortal, and immortality is a constant state. It is as true now as it ever was or ever will be, because it implies no change at all. It is not a continuum, nor is it understood by being compared to an opposite. Knowledge never involves comparisons. That is its main difference from everything else the mind can grasp.
Mhm. So let's have fun for a moment. That's all the reading we're going to do. Let's have fun and look at this question about going to the point where perception is no longer used, where judgments of any kind, comparisons are no longer used, which remove, when we reach that point where they're no longer used, all the blocks to the awareness of love's presence have been removed entirely. And you might ask, how is that possible while I'm living in this world? It's a reasonable question. And so here's the question I need your help with. Who is the you who are living in this world? When you say, how can I live in this world without judgment, without perception? How can I possibly function here? Who's the you that you are assuming? Okay, this has layers, by the way. Who's the you that's living in this world? And so obviously level confusion can come into here. And immediately the first answer would be, what's the body that lives in this world? Okay, so that was the easy part. Yes, the body lives in this world is true. It's a biological organism in this world. The deeper question that will probably may not be helpful for everybody, but is your mind living in this world?
No,
And why?
because your mind is eternal and it's the thought of God. Your mind is in God. Now, my ego lives in this world. My ego's mind, which my ego uses the brain to construct things. But my mind, my eternal mind that is one with God, is not of this world or in this world.
Mm-hmm. And by extension, David, we could say the same thing of spirit, pure spirit. Or could we? Is your pure spirit in this world? And what do we mean by this world?
My pure spirit, it can be influential in this world, though it is not of this world.
It's certainly not of this world. And so anyway, so some of these are like Zen koans, like there's not clear answers even after you've looked at it. But I think it's very safe to say, yes, the body is here. very safe to say that the mind that is a part of God is not limited to this planet. And spirit, the question would be whether or not, well, again, it comes down to the words. Is spirit living in this world? Is your being here? And what do we mean by this world? So a bunch of other hands went up. Sorry, I wanted to give some other people a chance. Heather?
Reminds me of the lesson yesterday when it said, the question is not who we are, it's what we are. It's what is living in this world.
Correct. What is living in this world? And yeah. So you can go as deep, as you want with this. Like, is your spirit really living in the world as you understand it? Not likely, not the world of illusions. Is your mind living in the world of chaos and illusions? And as David made a distinction, well, my ego mind certainly is identified with this world, but my most holy mind is much more abstract than that. It's not specific to this world. Noel?
To me, this world is my perceptions. There's no objective this world. So I think we talked a while ago about the mind being split often in two directions. And I mean, it really is like Zen koans. And I don't have any final answers whatsoever, but as I just keep breaking through and become more fluid, I can go to the Holy Spirit for enlightenment, moment by moment, inch by inch.
Mm-hmm. Lovely. Yes. Richard?
Yeah, hi. Something resonated and it was right on. I'm in the world, but not of the world. That's the world of physicality for me, the ego's wants. What I believe is a change in energy in my spirit, and that goes right to my essence. I need words in order to communicate, and I believe the intuitive thought is the wisdom to know the difference if I can get back to myself. I need to eat, I need to get to work, I need certain things, but they do not define me. I do not become the object out there.
Yes.
So I am not in the world. I'm in the world, meaning to find this power, I have to be out of my mind because the mind cannot define the infinite. All I can do is reduce it to what I believe it is, which is this is a complete fraud. So I'm a fraud. If
Image of you is a fraud. Yes.
yeah, the image that I present. The problem is, and I said it the other day, I play the game, just don't become the game. But I become the game, and I forget. And the most powerful thing that when I was a kid and a psychiatrist was helping me and get off of drugs. This was back in the 70s. And the most, and he was figuring this out, my sister, my brother, the way I was raised, and this and that. And the most powerful thing he said to me, and he wasn't even saying it to me, was, it's all a game. And I still stay in communication with him today. He's in his 90s, and I tell him, I say that to him, just to remember it's a game. And all we do is just play the game and enjoy myself.
Nice.
While it's happening.
Nice.
So I think the spirit is more my essence.
For sure. Thank
So
you. That's a good
the
reminder.
energy. Thank you.
I think we'll end on that note. Thank you, Richard. So
Sure.
thank you all. David, thank you for reading. This was fun. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful. And we will pick up again next week with section 4.3. Until then, remember those images of all the other people are no more real than the image you have of yourself. And the last thing the ego wants you to do is start questioning how all that happened, how that became part of your narrative, your story. It wants to defend and protect its grip on your attention and keep you from getting to the root cause of this thought system. But it has no chance now that we're on this path. So thank you all for your attention. Namaste.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste. Thanks, David.
You got it.
Thank you, Jonica, and everyone.
Thank you.